Stood among the crowd, just another face in a sea of strangers, when I first saw them. The little girl couldn't have been more than 6, her tiny hand clutched in her father's weathered one as they crossed the busy intersection. It wasn't anything they did that caught my attention, it was everything about them. The way he knelt to her level despite the rush-hour bustle. The gentle patience in his eyes when she pointed excitedly at something in a store window. The matching handmade bracelets they wore. I found myself following them, drawn by a story I couldn't yet name but somehow needed to witness. If you're watching this video right now, you're about to experience something that changed not just my life, but the lives of millions who've shared in this journey. Before we begin, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, not for the algorithms or numbers, but because stories like David and Sophie's deserve to be shared, and because I promise you'll want to be part of this community when you see what happens next. David Chen never planned on being a single father. At 32, his life had followed a predictable path: college, a steady job at an accounting firm, marriage to his college sweetheart Eliza. They'd planned everything meticulously, including starting a family. Sophie was born on a rainy Tuesday in April, perfect in every way with her mother's eyes and her father's determined chin. For 3 years, their life was the picture of contentment that David had always imagined. Until the headaches started. "It's just stress," Eliza insisted, popping another aspirin as she packed Sophie's lunch. "The project at work will be over in a few weeks." But the headaches didn't stop when the project ended. They got worse, accompanied by dizzy spells and occasional numbness in her left hand. When Eliza finally collapsed while reading Sophie a bedtime story, David's world began its slow, inexorable collapse. Glioblastoma. The word felt foreign on David's tongue, clinical and cold. Stage 4. Aggressive. The doctors spoke of treatment options, of fighting, but their eyes told a different story. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. Eliza made it 14 months. She fought with a grace that left everyone in awe, determined to give Sophie as many memories as possible. She recorded videos, wrote letters for future birthdays, filled photo albums with careful annotations. And she prepared David as best she could. "Promise me you won't disappear into grief," she whispered one night, the hospice room quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. "Sophie needs you present, not just physically there." David promised, though he had no idea how he would keep that vow. When Eliza slipped away on a quiet Sunday morning, Sophie curled against her side, he felt as though half of himself had vanished with her. The first months were a blur of motions. Wake up. Get Sophie dressed. Drop her at preschool. Work. Pick her up. Dinner. Bath. Bedtime. Collapse. Repeat. He functioned, but barely. Sophie's questions about her mother pierced him like physical wounds. "When is mommy coming back from heaven? Does mommy still love me if she can't hug me? Are you going to go to heaven too?" That last question, asked as he tucked her in 6 months after Eliza's death, broke something open in David. The fear in his daughter's eyes, the trembling of her small chin, he realized with crushing clarity that he hadn't kept his promise. He was physically present but emotionally absent, leaving his 4-year-old to navigate her grief alone while carrying the additional burden of worrying about losing him too. That night, after Sophie finally fell asleep, David sat on his kitchen floor and truly wept for the first time since the funeral. He wept for Eliza, for the future they'd lost, for his daughter growing up without her mother, and for his own paralyzing inadequacy. When the tears finally subsided, something had shifted. He couldn't bring Eliza back, but he could be the father Sophie deserved, fully present, fully committed. The next morning, David called his boss and requested a meeting. By afternoon, he had negotiated a part-time schedule that would allow him to be home when Sophie finished preschool. He enrolled in a support group for single parents and another specifically for children who had lost a parent, bringing Sophie to weekly sessions where she could express her grief through art and play with other children who understood. Most importantly, he started the Mommy Memory Project. Each night before bed, they would share one memory of Eliza, look at photos, or read from the journals she had left. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried, but they did it together. "Daddy," Sophie asked one night, about 3 months into their new routine, "can we make pancakes like Mommy used to?" David froze. Cooking had been Eliza's domain, he could barely manage boxed mac and cheese. But looking at Sophie's hopeful face, he nodded. "We can try." The kitchen disaster that followed became one of their favorite stories. Flour everywhere, batter too runny, the first pancake stuck to the ceiling when David flipped it too enthusiastically. But by the end, they had produced 3 misshapen but edible pancakes, which they ate with excessive amounts of syrup while giggling at the mess. That morning marked a turning point. David realized that honoring Eliza's memory didn't mean doing things exactly as she would have. It meant creating a new life that kept her spirit alive while allowing them to move forward. He started taking Sophie to the park where Eliza had loved to sketch, bringing along art supplies so Sophie could develop her own budding talent. He learned to braid hair by watching YouTube tutorials, practicing night after night until he could create the intricate styles Sophie admired on her friends. When Sophie's kindergarten announced a mother-daughter dance, David approached the principal about making it a family dance instead, opening the door for other non-traditional families to participate. Not everything was smooth. David dated briefly, a colleague who seemed kind and understanding, but ended things when he realized he was rushing the relationship out of fear rather than genuine connection. Sophie went through a phase of intense anger, throwing tantrums that left them both exhausted and tearful. David's mother criticized his parenting decisions, insisting Sophie needed a feminine influence and suggesting she might be better off living with her. Through it all, David kept showing up. He started a blog documenting their journey, initially as therapy for himself but eventually finding a community of other single parents navigating similar waters. He shared the triumphs, Sophie's first lost tooth, her starring role as a tree in the school play, and the struggles, the night she sobbed because she couldn't remember the sound of her mother's laugh, the parent-teacher conference where he felt judged by the other, mostly female, parents. The blog led to speaking engagements at grief support groups, where David's honest account of his failures and small victories resonated with others feeling overwhelmed by single parenthood. A local news station did a feature on their story for Mother's Day, focusing on how David had incorporated Eliza's memory into their daily lives while building something new. "That's where I first saw them on screen, before encountering them in person months later." The news segment showed David helping Sophie tie her shoes, both wearing the friendship bracelets they had made at a workshop for grieving families. It showed their wall of memories, photos of Eliza alongside new pictures of their life without her. It showed Sophie confidently telling the interviewer, "My daddy does everything. He can make pancakes and braids and he knows how to fix my heart when it feels broken about Mommy." By Sophie's 7th birthday, their life had found a new rhythm. David had been promoted to a position that allowed him to work primarily from home. Sophie was thriving in school, her natural resilience bolstered by the stable foundation David had rebuilt for them. They had a small but mighty support system, friends who had stepped up, other parents from the grief group, neighbors who had become like family. For her birthday, David planned a special surprise. Using recordings of Eliza's voice from videos and the audio messages she'd left, he worked with a sound engineer to create a teddy bear that played Eliza saying, "I love you, Sophie," when squeezed. He worried it might be too much, might reopen wounds, but when Sophie unwrapped it and heard her mother's voice, her face lit up with pure joy. "Now I can remember what she sounds like," she whispered, hugging the bear tightly. That night, after the cake had been eaten and the guests had gone home, Sophie crawled into David's lap with the bear. "Daddy," she said thoughtfully, "I think Mommy would be proud of us." David's throat tightened. "Why do you think that, sweetheart?" "Because we're sad sometimes, but we're happy too. And you always say that's what Mommy wanted." In that moment, holding his daughter close, David felt a peace he hadn't experienced since before Eliza's diagnosis. They would always carry the pain of her absence, but they had learned to carry joy alongside it. They had kept their promise to her. That's when I approached them, that day I first saw them crossing the street. I introduced myself as a documentary filmmaker interested in stories of resilience and healing. I explained how their journey might help others facing similar challenges. David was hesitant at first, protective of Sophie and their privacy, but Sophie tugged on his hand. "Daddy, maybe we could help other kids who miss their mommies," she said with the simple wisdom of children. Over the next year, I documented their life, the ordinary moments that revealed extraordinary strength. David teaching Sophie to ride a bike, his face a mixture of terror and pride as she wobbled down the sidewalk. Sophie having a meltdown on the anniversary of Eliza's death, and David sitting patiently on the floor outside her room until she was ready for comfort. Their Sunday tradition of making pancakes, now perfectly round and golden, while dancing to Eliza's favorite songs. The documentary aired 3 years to the day after Eliza's passing. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from single parents, from children who had lost parents, from people who simply needed to believe that grief could be survived without losing the capacity for joy. David established a foundation in Eliza's name, providing resources for families navigating loss. He wrote a book about their journey that became a bestseller not because it offered easy answers, but because it acknowledged the messiness of grief while offering hope. Sophie, now 10, started a pen pal program connecting children who had lost parents, creating the community she had needed in those early days. Today, as I watch them from across the park, Sophie now a confident 12-year-old showing her father a complicated friendship bracelet pattern she's created, I'm struck by how far they've come. David has recently started dating again, this time with a genuine openness to building a new chapter. Sophie has her mother's artistic talent and her father's resilience, a combination that makes her shine. Their story continues to inspire millions, not because they're extraordinary people who overcame grief without scars, but because they're ordinary people who show us that love doesn't end with loss, it transforms. David's love for his daughter didn't just break hearts, it showed us how to put them back together again. If this story has touched you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share stories like David and Sophie's because we believe in the power of human connection, in the healing that comes from knowing we're not alone in our struggles. Your support helps us continue finding and sharing these moments of light in darkness. And remember what David always says at the end of his speaking engagements: grief is the price we pay for love, but love is always, always worth it.